In a video passed to the media by his lawyer, Jordan's Prince Hamza says this may be the last time he can contact anyone. He says he's been ordered by the army's chief to stay at home and that his phone and internet are being cut off. He criticised Jordan's leaders for corruption and denied being part of any conspiracy.
There is no outside agenda. There is nothing on my part to affect the country or outside plotting from behind the scenes. We listen to these accusations over and over again. This is only in order to make a smokescreen over the retreat and retraction that we witness in the country every day, in our beloved country.
The video's release came shortly after Jordanian state TV announced multiple arrests of former senior officials on Saturday night. Jordan's army chief denied that Prince Hamza was among them, but it did mention the arrest of the former head of the royal court, Bassem Awadallah.
Bassem Awadallah was a long-time confidant of the king and was at one time a minister of finance, and he has been arrested along with several others that were very close to the heart of the court. It is not clear exactly what the role that Prince Hamza played in this, but clearly there has been a division inside the court that has led the security forces to consider this of utmost danger to the stability of Jordan's government.
Prince Hamza is the half-brother of King Abdullah. When their father, King Hussein, passed away in 1999, King Abdullah was crowned and Prince Hamza became the Crown Prince of Jordan. However, King Abdullah stripped him of this title 5 years later. Following Saturday's arrests, regional leaders, including the GCC, were quick to express solidarity with King Abdullah. Security personnel have been deployed in the capital Amman and other parts of the country. There are still more questions than answers about the highly unusual arrests in what's long been considered a stable country in the Middle East. Burdon-Manley, Aljazeera.
Let's explore this further. Let's speak to Dalia Fahmy. She's an Associate Professor of Political Science at Long Island University, joins us from New Jersey via Skype. Dalia Fahmy, welcome to the programme. How do you read what's going on here?
This is really reflective of the domestic internal rift, and the wording of the former crown prince about corruption really is reflective of what's been happening economically in Jordan. You know, this king, King Abdullah, has been running or talking about economic reforms, not really political reforms, since he took office. And when you have a country that's hurting economically, it becomes a point where opposition forces or opposition within the government can rise and say, we haven't had political reform, especially since the Arab Spring. The economic reforms are failing. Today, for example, Jordan's foreign debt has reached 35 billion. It's 90%, 95% of the country's GDP. And so what that does is it lends itself to several challenges. In the pandemic era, increasing refugee crisis, the king had to implement some austerity measures. So the country's been economically hurting, which has put him in the kind of crosshairs of many opposition forces inside the court who see him as failing compared to his father.
Prince Hamza denies any wrongdoing. Clearly, the royal court think otherwise.
Well, what he did was meet, and he referenced this in his video, he met with members of tribal elders or tribal leaders, and they voiced their dissent. And so him being in that presence signaled that there could be a rising internal rift, but really a threat. Remember, he's the former crown prince. The late King Hussein wanted him to be the crown prince, and it was King Abdullah who removed him. And so there is, especially in this time of austerity, a comparison, and it seems that former Crown Prince Hamza sees himself as the natural leader, hearkening back to a time of his father.
Where could this lead? What are the dangers of what's happening here?
This is probably not going to lead anywhere, but what the king has to do is probably raise some of the austerity measures. It's going to be very difficult because these are the conditions the IMF has placed on him to reduce that debt to GDP ratio in order for the IMF loans to continue. So domestically, it's going to be a tough time for the king. In terms of international relations and where he stands in the region, there probably won't be any changes. He's still held favorably in the United States and in the UK. He's a long-term ally. Jordan shares a very long border with Israel, and so there might not be any change in status quo internationally. This is really a domestic rift.
Right, I was going to say that the regional leaders have been quick to express solidarity with King Abdullah. Are there those nations who may be less willing to stand alongside Jordan if the circumstances were right or changed?
Well, the interesting thing is that although Amman is very vital to Israel's interest and it's a cornerstone, you know, Jordan is the custodian of East Jerusalem and shares a 335-kilometer border with Israel, the West Bank, essentially. The king's relationship with Netanyahu has been strained, and so the silence coming from Israel is quite telling. It does not mean that they would want someone aside from King Abdullah, but the silence is quite telling, and it just emblematic of the rift. For example, just this past week, we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu refuse to approve the supply of water to Jordan. You saw the tit-for-tat over airspace of the king was not allowed to go to Jerusalem, and then the next day they refused to allow Netanyahu to fly to the UAE, his helicopter over Jordan. So it's been a very strained relationship for the past couple of years. It does not mean that it'll change relations, but let's see what happens in Israel, looking at what's happening in Jordan.
Dalia Fahmy, great to get your perspective. Do appreciate that. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.